Your grandfather would walk through a modern supermarket and barely recognize half of what's being sold as food. The bread would confuse him most of all. Soft, perfectly white, sliced into identical squares, sealed in plastic, able to sit on a shelf for days without changing. If he tasted it, he probably wouldn't call it bread at all. A century ago, bread was alive. Every household kept some form of sourdough starter, just flour and water left to ferment naturally with wild yeast from the air. There was nothing fashionable or artisan about it. It was simply how bread was made. The dough sat for long hours, sometimes days, slowly fermenting and breaking down compounds that made digestion harder. The flour itself was stone ground and whole. Nothing had been stripped away. The bran stayed in. The germs stayed in. The nutrients stayed in. The loaf came out dense, sour, nourishing, and filling enough to carry a worker through an entire day. Then industry arrived and decided bread needed to become more profitable. When roller mills spread across Europe and America in the late 19th century, they changed flour forever. The new machines could remove the bran and germ, leaving only the pale white starch people quickly learned to associate with wealth and refinement. White bread suddenly looked cleaner, softer, more modern. It also lost most of its nutrition. Vitamins that had existed naturally in grain disappeared in the process, so governments later stepped in and ordered synthetic enrichment to replace what the milling process had removed in the first place. At the same time, commercial yeast replaced long fermentation because factories could not wait 2 days for dough to rise. Bread became something that could be manufactured quickly, sliced uniformly, wrapped in plastic, and distributed everywhere. Convenient, yes. But no longer connected to the way humans had prepared grain for thousands of years. Your great-grandmother didn't need labels explaining added nutrients. She started with real food. The same thing happened with bones and fat. Older generations never wasted them because they understood instinctively that the richest nutrition was often hidden in the parts modern people throw away. A roast chicken wasn't finished after dinner. The carcass went into a pot with onion scraps, herbs, and leftover vegetables, simmering for hours until the kitchen smelled warm and heavy. By morning the liquid turned gelatinous as it cooled, filled with minerals, collagen, amino acids, and everything extracted slowly from the bones. When someone got sick, this was medicine. When money was tight, this was survival. A single carcass could feed a family twice. Today most people buy boneless, skinless cuts wrapped in plastic trays because industry convinced them convenience was sophistication. Bones became waste products. Animal fat became something to fear. Stock became cubes full of salt and flavoring. Families pay more for less nourishment while the useful parts disappear into factories and rendering plants. Your grandfather would have looked at modern kitchens and wondered why people willingly throw away half the animal after paying for all of it. He also would have found it strange that modern homes depend completely on electricity to preserve food. Before refrigerators, families built systems that worked with nature instead of against it. Root cellars kept potatoes, carrots, onions, apples, and cabbage fresh for months using nothing but stable underground temperature. No humming compressor. No monthly energy bill. No panic when the power went out. Food harvested in autumn carried households through winter because storage itself was treated as a skill. Then refrigerators arrived and were sold not simply as appliances, but as symbols of progress. Cellars disappeared. Old storage knowledge faded. Modern people gained convenience but lost resilience. Now food spoils within days if electricity fails. Homes rely on an uninterrupted system most people do not control and barely understand. The older methods were not primitive. They were remarkably efficient forms of engineering developed over generations. Even water changed. Your great-grandmother would have laughed at the idea of paying money for bottled water while rain fell freely onto the roof overhead. Across villages and farms, households collected rainwater in barrels and cisterns as a normal part of life. Wells and springs were protected carefully because water meant independence. People understood where it came from because they gathered it themselves. As cities expanded and utilities centralized, water slowly transformed from a shared necessity into a managed service. Pipes replaced wells. Corporations and governments took control of distribution. Metering followed. Monthly bills followed. Eventually, many people forgot that collecting and storing water had once been ordinary household knowledge. Now entire communities become helpless during shortages or infrastructure failures because the old systems are gone. None of this means the past was perfect. Older generations faced hardship modern people would never willingly accept. They endured rationing, cold winters, exhausting labor, and uncertainty. But they also possessed practical knowledge that made them harder to destabilize. They knew how to bake bread without factories, how to stretch one animal into multiple meals, how to store food without electricity, how to preserve water. They were less dependent on distant systems because survival skills still existed inside the home. Modern life trades resilience for convenience again and again. Sometimes the trade is worth it. Sometimes it is not. The danger comes when people forget there was ever another way to live. That is why relearning these skills matters. Not because you need to reject modernity or pretend it is still 1890, but because dependence grows quietly. A person who can bake real bread, make stock, preserve food, or collect water possesses something increasingly rare: options. Those skills are not nostalgia. They are insurance. They are independence in practical form. Your grandfather was not stronger because his world was easier. He was stronger because he knew how to function when systems failed. Somewhere along the way, many people stopped learning those lessons because convenience made them seem unnecessary. Now they are becoming necessary again.